Welcome to the Zarnia for Games and Geekery. This is Speak to the Geek. I am John Keevy, and I'm talking to these two lovely people, Dale Halvorsen and Sam Beckbessinger. This is part 2 of our discussion. Our first one, we just talked about their amazing book, Girls of Little Hope. This one is going to be a little bit more in-depth. I'm not going to be afraid of spoilering. If you haven't read the book, beware. I am going to spoil a bunch of things, they're going to spoil a bunch of things, and I think that's going to make your enjoyment of this book even better. So, yeah, let's get into it. Dale Halvorsen and Sam Beckbessinger, the twisted minds behind the twisted tale. Folks, don't shy away about talking spoilers here, because this is what it's all about. I really wanted to try this on Speak to the Geek, because I really admire, from a perspective of craft, what y'all did. And I don't think we can talk about the craft of Girls of Little Hope without doing some big reveals about what happens. The first thing I want to get into is dual timelines. The plot is in the past and in the present. You split timelines. I'm going to tell you right off the bat, I don't like it when people do that. I think too many people are doing it. I think cold opens are some very fucking lazy ass writing. So I was prepared to be a little skeptical.
Fair.
But it was absolutely required for what you were doing, and it paid off so well in so many ways. Tell me about the process of deciding to split the timelines.
Sam, you take this. I think you know more about this than I do.
Well, you see, Kiwi. So my nomination for my Greek creds, my nomination for my geek creds here. The one thing I'll back myself on is I really love a spreadsheet. And you wouldn't think that writing a novel requires multiple complex spreadsheets with formulae in them, but in fact it does, if you're me and Dale.
I would also like to add, Sam likes to make things as difficult for herself as possible.
And for Dale, unfortunately. You can drag him along.
That's the spreadsheets.
Yeah, so technically, actually, they're not really flashbacks because they are diary entries, right? So we had a lot of fun with found objects in the book. Because there is the diary, which is they are flashbacks. They're telling the story more linearly, but there are also these little artifacts telling a third story, which is Ronnie Gaskin's story, also kind of in flashback. And there are little snippets about the town itself, which has this long history actually, which Dale wrote a lot of, and unfortunately we ended up having to cut a lot of from the book, but maybe a sequel one day. So there's deep lore on all layers, and to keep track of everything, there are timelines, there are spreadsheets, and I think working it out, we started off just trying to tell the story in quite a linear way, figure out this is what happened, and otherwise we were just really getting very befuddled. And this is Dale's really positive energy, which is very helpful, as he kept saying, can we just actually plot what actually happened? So we did that. We had this big cork board before I moved when we were talking in person, and then we eventually migrated to 5 million spreadsheets. And basically we sort of started with that almost, and then it became, we knew what had actually happened, and then it became a question of, that being the case, what is the most interesting way to structure this and to reveal it at what time to the reader. So, we were having to keep track of, what does the reader know at what point? What is the reader's theory going to be at what point? So we had notes on each chapter where we were tracking, currently this is what appears to be happening, etc., because it was very confusing. And we shuffled it around 5 million times. We did at one point try kind of tell the novel in 2 halves, so without the flashback, just with a gap in the middle. It's not as much fun. We kind of had to figure it out first, and then figure out structurally what would be the most fun way to reveal.
At the onset, I think, Sam, you can correct me on this, but we wanted to write an unconventional novel. Thus the images in it, the diary entries, the multiple points of view. You get to see characters talk about themselves, talk about other characters. But central to that was, how do we introduce this missing person and have people care about this missing person?
Yes, because not Mary Beth, sorry. Which character goes missing? I've forgotten the names now.
Cat Larkin.
Yeah. Cat is the one who's missing, and she's the one who the diary entries come from.
Yeah, exactly.
That's where the diary entries came from, and then eventually it just became a big puzzle, and we had plots for every timeline, and it was just a matter of how to combine those plots in the most effective way, and how to structure and pace them.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I really respect writers that manage without flashbacks. Like, I know this was a writing rule in Succession, was they said no flashbacks ever, because they were like, it's lazy. I think in our case, it was such a balancing act, trying to balance the tenseness of it's a true crime story. You want them to plunge the reader into that drama and that stress, but we really wanted the novel to be very human and very warm. And, we wanted people to care. And for that, you kind of need the characters to have space to just be messing around with their friends, which is kind of what so much of the novel is, which you're not going to be doing. Yeah. One, if a third of your trio is gone, and two, if you're in the middle of a crisis. So it felt like you don't care about the characters unless you see them before, I think.
Yeah. But let's not avoid the spoiler. They don't come back from the woods.
Dead the whole time.
No one has come back from the woods. They've all been dead the whole time.
Everyone dies. Yeah. Everyone dies.
Which is a revelation that absolutely relies on starting where you start and then them figuring it out, as well as figuring out why Kat is the one who doesn't come back,
Yeah.
Victim
that was kind
not
of
victim turned detective.
Yeah. That was actually, so the Kat's tapeworm, the Kate worm as we referred to her, was actually kind of one of the first ideas that we had in the novel. And so Dale watches an enormous amount of classic horror films. He's introduced me to all of his favorites over the years, which is one of the many upsides of being friends with Dale. And we watched Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the 1978. Which one is it?
Is that the Donald Sutherland one?
The best one. And there's this kind of blink and you miss it scene about a body snatcher transformation.
29 minutes from the end?
See, Dale knows everything. That goes wrong, where it's a man who the transformation gets confused between him and his dog. And it's like the second in the movie, and it's played for laughs. But that was something that we thought about, when we were kind of first imagining Body Snatchers. The Body Snatcher idea kind of was probably the first idea, I think the kind of core of the idea. But the Kate worm idea was one of the earliest thoughts that we had, was this kind of something goes wrong in the transformation, and what might that be like?
And more than that, they are like, I'm not getting into details, but there are things that happen in your life that they're usually within the body snatcher genre, from 1956 and from 1978. The body snatchers know exactly what they're doing. The body dissolves, and they go about their business of taking over the world. And they're both pretty bleak, because the spoilers, the body snatchers win, but Sam and I wanted to do something different, and one of the things we talked about was there's no guidebook. You wake up as a duplicate of yourself. You don't know that. A person is their memories, I guess. But they don't have an agenda. Our spin on them was that they operate on instinct. There is no master plan, which was a really fun way to explore something that has been explored many, many times.
Yeah, that's a very good perspective, trying to find like a new angle on it. How did you manage to incorporate so many homages to all these classics of horror? I immediately was thinking of The Fly with the Kate worm.
Yeah.
But how did you manage to do it without? You never feel like you're ripping anything off. Everything feels like a loving reference or something that you've spun in a new way, in a new angle.
I often think about Austin Kleon's thing, his book. He has this incredible short book called Steal Like an Artist, and he talks about how all art originates with theft, but what's important and the difference between sort of cribbing or copying and stealing is when you steal something, you make it your own. And for me, I think what was really important, one, was that both of us, we really respect and admire the horror people who've come before us and make sure that we're drawing from a wide variety of influences, right? Like, it's not just one thing that we're trying to copy. And then the other thing is that we married it with incredibly personal and honest experiences. So something else that I thought about a lot, a friend of mine, Matt Khalil, wrote this amazing book called The Three Wells of Screenwriting, where he talks about the sources of inspiration being imagination, kind of, the thing we often think about, but actually that being quite a small source of inspiration. It's far more often, it's, things that you observe in the world and memory, right? Like, And I think so much of what made this unique is that we drew also a lot on things that had happened to us and the experiences, what it felt like to grow up in a small town, feeling like you were in the middle of nowhere, cut off from the rest of the world, and you were an absolute weirdo and outsider. You didn't understand yourself, and no one else understood you except for the handful of other weirdos who you found who saved your life. And that's incredibly personal. And while, it felt like writing memoir to some extent, although we're not actually half tapeworm hybrid body snatchers, either of us, that we know. That's I think what takes it from being purely something that feels like a homage to a bunch of other media to being something that feels like ours and unique and original, right?
Yeah, when you write horror, you need to figure out a way how you're going to push every little trope a little further, or subvert it, or do something with it, because otherwise it just ends up like everything else that you've read and watched before. So we had a lot of fun doing that. Yeah.
So one of the things that Dale always said is, it's a quote by Wes Craven, which is, the first monster you scare the audience with is yourself. And so a lot of what we also went back to was thinking about what are the dark things in ourselves and in our own histories that were the true sources of horror. So we were aware of the genre, and we were pulling from the genre, but the kind of source of the feelings was coming from memory.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
What do you make of horror and feminism being two people who have created this femme-focused, strong female friendship story?
Dale, do you want to go?
Whew, I'm not sure. Can you repeat the question?
The question is, what is your take on horror and feminism? Why does it work together, and how did you incorporate it?
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of it is about point of view in horror, right? Like, because there definitely is a conservative thread in horror as a genre. It's in many ways, it's fundamentally kind of a conservative medium. It's all about the spectacle of often women being attacked and violence being done to them, often people being punished for these sins of various kinds. And I think feminist horror, for me, a lot of what it's about is, it's about actually inhabiting the interiority of those people is firstly the thing. Finding ways for them to be empowered and not just victims. But I mean, horror, it's fundamentally terrible things are going to happen to people. One of the things we spoke about when we were writing this was, there's a lot of true crime, specifically as a genre, is the spectacle of watching terrible things being done to young women, particularly white attractive young women.
And them disappearing. That's how it starts.
And we were really interested in, what are the terrible things that women do to each other? That's definitely a strain of this book. We were interested in exploring, as Dale said, also the effects of trauma. So it's not just that, terrible things happen to them and they experience their own bodies as traumatic in various ways, which is also kind of an interesting thing. But it's also, I think specifically in the Mary Beth Kate Worm storyline, I think what you experience, or you get an insight into there, is that, these traumas reverberate not only through your lifetime, but through a whole family history, Yeah,
one of the things to that storyline, with the revelation about the tapeworm eggs and the diet pills, which was really like the oh fuck moment for me when that puzzle piece clicked into place, is something that kind of reverberates through the rest of the book, is the everyday horror, of the 90s small town.
90s misogyny.
You keep on talking. You keep on bringing up the doctor who feels up the various people. And it's the sort of horrors of the 90s, while people were skricking about demons and Satanists, turning their eyes away from the pedophile doctor, the drug dealing local vet, the various things, and just like the
phobia,
the fat phobia, the domestic abuse, the dragging a woman out by her for everyone to see,
ponytail.
Just all the the abuse and just that milieu of.
I mean, it's a really good thing that we've solved all of these problems in society entirely by now in 2023, and none of these things happen anymore at all, and we've left this in the past. That's a great thing.
Yeah. Okay.
It's probably a better time to be a little bit of a weirdo now than it was back then, but that's not saying a lot.
Yeah.
So I agree with Sam.
Yeah, you got me. But tell me then, why the 90s? Well, don't wiggle your eyebrows. Just tell me why the 90s.
This is my Dale. Do you want to pick this up? I think we were really going back to our own teenage years, and Dale, more for me, these were the times of his own monstrous adolescence. Mine was, mine was more kind of early 2000s, but still definitely affected by this time period. So that was a part of it. It was just we were doing a lot of digging into our own memories, and that's where we landed. But also because it started life as a cold case, so somewhat happened a little bit by accident, but it became a very interesting thing to explore. We had a lot of fun doing research. We found 5 million, read a lot of zines, read a lot of 90s magazines.
That doesn't sound like research. It just sounds like a regular weekend.
Saturday night, yeah.
Sam will know me. I'm a huge X-Files nerd. So my lot of love of the 90s comes from that. But also the decade in which it was set. One of the themes in the book is change. And Sam and I spoke about this. The 90s was a decade of change. Things changed rapidly. And people didn't know if it was going to change for the good or the bad. And that culminated in Y2K. In choosing a setting, we just felt that there was a lot to explore there. It just fitted with our story. That's how we ended up back there. And it also... geographically, that's why we chose to make up a fictional American town, because it was right for the story. Yeah.
What do you two think of as the ending of the book? Because there's definitely some, little post-denouement, like, wrap-up things, and I'm not quite
Yeah.
sure what you two think of as the end. And when did you decide it was the end?
You go first, Sam. You
What
go
a
first.
question. I mean, like, this book was tricky. So I think the kind of the Kate Worm revelation, the body snatches, those things were quite clear in our head quite early on in writing. So to some extent, the second half of the novel was much, much easier to write than the first half. The first half we redrafted, it felt like 17 times, because trying to figure out like how to make the whole true crime mystery work was incredibly difficult. And how to drop the revelations. It was so hard. Once we got into the flow of, okay, now you know what's going on, now let's just kind of get on the road trip, basically. Unleash hell. That was kind of fun. It felt like we'd set up the dominoes and then the dominoes were falling. Up until the question of how on earth do you end the story? And up until I think almost the last draft, there were two alternative endings to the book. And we even sent to beta readers the two alternative endings. And it could have kind of gone in these two quite different directions.
The whole way through, we wanted to throw moral quandaries at our characters. So they're continually confronted by difficult choices. Right up until the end. The ending is a difficult choice for them. You can go the route where you can tie it up neatly with a bow and you can explain everything, and some people love that. I just think it's important to leave spaces in the story for readers to fill in their own details and experiences and things like that. So
I mean, Dale and I continue to have conversations about like, what do we think happened?
I think like so you two are definitely talking about like, plot wise, what is the ending of the book, and I was kind of meaning like in terms of like the emotional climax, because for me, I was most compelled by Mary Beth and Kat, and I think kudos, because the scene where they face each other down and was just chef's kiss, just like such a beautiful climax to the story, and I really think wrapping up what to do with the clones is the it's the postscript. And it's,
I think really it's a book about puberty, right? And I think, what is it to cross that threshold between child and adult? And I think for me, so much of what that threshold was, and I think for most people, is that moment when you understand that your parents, who you've found really good reasons to resent, often are also just human people who were once teenagers too, and were trying to figure out their own shit, you know? And I think if that's why that feels like the emotional climax of the novel, it's because I think that's the moment for Kat. That's Kat's moment of maturity, I think, of letting go of her child point of view and stepping into adulthood, which often is coming to terms with who your parents were.
And then for the other emotional climax is basically Donna saving Ray from what she's about to do. Ray was a very, very compelling character to me, I think. And someone who was probably one of the biggest, well, not one of the biggest, but definitely like, they're all victims of like the small town horror of regular society in their own ways, but Tammy Ray is especially compelling. Time's about to run out, but I've got so much I still want to talk to you about.
I even we brought books, Sam, as props.
Oh.
We won't be able to show you those things.
No, but the time is gonna go, and then we go. Oh man, would you like to keep on talking at some point? Come back and can we talk about, because now even the pop-ups about the call's about to end, and there's so much stuff in here. It's been lovely chatting to you two. I'm very excited for that. To hopefully chat to you all again. Oh, the time is actually ticking down.
It's very dramatic.
Yeah.
Did we decide who the biggest geek was?
No.
Oh.
See, this is why I do it up front, because otherwise I fuck it up. And with that, thank you so much, Dale and Sam, for spending your time with us, and thank you for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, and pop us a comment. What are your thoughts on the... See? I freak out. I'm always freaking out. Anyway, this is going to be what I'm going to put it in the can, because, you know, like, hey, you know, error is the greatest teacher, and people can learn from my mistakes, which is write down a script. Cool.